As the story begins, an old man named Roland Bleuet orders an experiment to commence, while a young boy, also named Roland, casts magic, chanting an incantation. The old man observes, grinning as he thinks that with just a few more doses of the magic inducer, his human transmutation experiment will succeed. The old man orders Roland's trembling sister, Melisa, to hand him a potion, explaining that although it might taste unpleasant, Roland must endure it and drink. The maid, Karina, thinks to herself that the potion is a magic inducer, wondering since when Renki started feeding it to Roland. She recalls from a story that continuous consumption of the inducer would turn Roland's blood into a deep blue magical liquid instead of human blood. Seeing Melisa hesitate, Karina begins to suspect that today might be the day everything becomes irreversible in the story. Panicked, she rushes forward, screaming "Young Master," and knocks the bottle over, causing it to shatter and spill the magic inducer everywhere. Roland and Melisa are stunned, while Renki furiously demands an explanation from Karina. Karina immediately apologizes. After she spilled the magic inducer, Renki angrily warns her that if she interrupts his experiment again, he will cut off one of her arms. After Karina apologizes, Renki dismisses her as useless before ending the day's experiment and leaving the room. Alone in the room, Roland hesitantly calls out to Karina. While Melisa worries that she got scolded because of them, Karina smiles reassuringly, asking if they are all right and confirming they weren't hurt. She pats their heads, tells them to rest, and prepares to leave. As she turns to go, Roland grabs her skirt, surprising her. He hesitates, asking if she could stay with him a little longer, but quickly retracts, saying he knows she's busy and they shouldn't bother her. Karina thinks to herself that this is the first time Roland has approached her willingly, likely frightened by the earlier incident. Realizing things cannot continue like this, she smiles and assures them she'll be back soon, then leaves the room. With an anxious expression, Karina reflects that now that she knows Renki is feeding Roland the magic inducer, she can no longer stay with the children. She resolves to escape this hell before the children suffer any further. It is revealed through narration that in the story Karina has entered, Roland and his sister Melisa are the children of Renki's deceased sister. Renki took them in because of their magical talents. However, Roland's extraordinary abilities only fueled Renki's greed, leading him to harbor a wicked desire to raise Roland into a great mage capable of ruling the world. Whenever Roland disobeyed, Renki would punish Melisa. These punishments were exceedingly cruel, ultimately leading to Melissa's death years later. Devastated by the loss of his sister, Roland had no time to grieve and was forced to continue his training to become a great mage. Years later, Roland earned the title of one of the Empire's greatest mages. However, on the night he saved the Empire from a disaster that nearly consumed the world, Roland, after saving the Empire, brutally murdered Renki. Yet, even after Renki's death, Roland could not forgive himself for causing Melissa's demise. His life became consumed by endless suffering and misery. This was the tragic plot of the story Karina had read in her previous life. As she read it, only one thought occupied her mind. But, upon waking up within the story, most of the plot had slipped from her memory. It wasn't surprising, as it was just one of the countless romance fantasy stories she had read in her past life. Nevertheless, as she saw the children's bright smiles and heard them call her name, Karina realized something. She had been reborn into this world to bring happiness to these children. With this newfound purpose, Karina began secretly preparing to flee the manor with Roland and Melisa. Karina set her plan into motion, determined to ensure everything was ready for their escape at a moment's notice. Behind Renki's back, she discreetly diverted food and living expenses, steadily building up their funds. Her plan was to escape to the capital, Edmure, a place far from the manor and densely populated, making it the perfect location to hide. With preparations finally complete, she began contemplating the escape plan. Renki took an afternoon nap, providing them with a crucial 3-hour window, during which the magical servants remained inactive. However, Karina had already spent 2 of those hours packing, leaving only 1 hour to execute their escape. Time was tight, but her resolve remained firm, believing they could make it out safely if everything went according to plan. Yet, the risks were immense. If they were caught, neither she nor the children would survive. Keeping the plan entirely secret was their only hope for freedom. Karina knocked on the children's door, asking for permission to enter. Roland nervously let her in, quickly telling Melisa they needed to prepare for more training, because their uncle hated waiting. Karina reassured them they weren't going to Renki. Melisa excitedly asked if Karina had come play with them and if Renki had allowed it. Roland nervously asked if Karina was really going to spend time with them. Seeing their desperate longing for affection, Karina reflected on their yearning for love and revealed her plan to take them somewhere safe. She told them Renki would soon conduct another human transmutation experiment and expressed her hope to escape the manor with them before that happened. Melisa, afraid of punishment, agreed to follow Karina. Roland, however, hesitated, doubting their uncle would simply let them leave. Karina proposed an idea, asking the children if they had ever secretly created a homunculus before. She assured them she wasn't blaming them, but explained they needed one to escape the manor. Reviewing her plan, Karina considered the obstacle. The children couldn't leave the manor without Renki's permission. Her solution was to use a homunculus, an artificial life form created through magic. She acknowledged the dangers of this spell. It required intense concentration, was prone to failure, and could be fatal if mistakes were made, hence its classification as forbidden magic. However, she knew the children, especially Roland with his extraordinary potential as a future archmage, could easily create and control a homunculus. Nevertheless, Roland's fear of using magic posed a challenge to her plan. Karina pleaded with the children to create a homunculus mimicking Renki to aid their escape. Roland hesitantly agreed, admitting his fear but willing to try. Melisa, more enthusiastic about using magic, reassured Roland they would succeed if they worked together. Inspired by Melissa's determination, Roland recalled their previous successes and agreed to cast the spell with her. Melisa hugged him, reminding him there was nothing to fear when they worked together as a team. Karina assured them she would handle the negotiations once the homunculus was created. She mentally urged herself to stay focused, knowing their plan allowed no room for hesitation. Karina urged the children to begin immediately, explaining she had already prepared the necessary materials for creating the homunculus. Melisa eagerly asked Roland if he was ready, and after a brief hesitation, he agreed. The two began the creation process and successfully conjured a homunculus identical to Renki. Karina, both nervous and impressed, noted how lifelike it looked, thinking most people wouldn't notice the difference. Melisa was ecstatic about their success, praising Roland's achievement. Roland smiled, acknowledging it was their teamwork. Karina commended their efforts and reminded them this was their only chance to escape while Renki slept soundly. With renewed determination, the trio prepared to leave the manor swiftly. Led by Renki's homunculus, Karina, Roland, and Melisa followed close behind, poised for their departure. The butler approached the homunculus, inquiring if Renki was heading out. The homunculus remained silent, unsettling the butler, who offered to prepare a carriage if Renki would simply state his destination. Karina swiftly intervened, stepping forward to explain that Renki was unable to speak due to the side effects of his magic. She claimed they were venturing into the forest to gather herbs to counteract these effects. Fixing the butler with a cold stare, Karina urged him not to keep Renki standing there, lest the side effects worsen. Startled, the butler acquiesced, agreeing to ready a carriage at the rear of the manor before taking his leave. Karina breathed a sigh of relief, grateful they had managed to deceive the butler without raising suspicion. Yet, she reminded herself, they weren't truly safe until they were far from the city. Karina informed Roland and Melisa that they would have to abandon this carriage soon, as the family crest could easily betray their identities. Once they reached the town, they would board a faster carriage bound for another city. As they journeyed onward, Renki's homunculus began to crumble, a clear sign that the magic sustaining it was reaching its limit. Roland alerted Karina, who urged them to hasten their pace. Karina realized they had left the manor just before Renki's nap was due to end. He might already be awake. She reminded Roland and Melisa to hold her hands tightly, lest they become separated. Upon reaching the street, they inquired with a coachman about carriages heading to Edmure. The man yawned, replying that no carriages were bound for Edmure that day. Just as Karina was about to ask when the next one might be available, Melisa spotted a suspicious figure. Karina recognized the man as one of Renki's subordinates. A chill ran down her spine. Renki must have discovered their escape and sent his men after them. They needed to leave immediately. Karina made a snap decision. They would take the carriage heading to Torres, despite their original plan to go to Edmure. The coachman hesitated, mentioning the carriage was already full. But Karina insisted, stressing their urgency. The coachman relented, agreeing they could ride, but only in the luggage compartment. Karina accepted gratefully, and they settled inside. Once enclosed in the luggage space, Karina comforted Roland and Melisa. She told them they were almost out of the city and could finally relax. Relief washed over Melisa and Roland as they asked if they had truly escaped Renki without being caught, and if they would still be forced to practice magic. Karina reassured them they would never have to do those things again and could now rest easy. As the carriage began to move, Karina thought to herself that it seemed like it was finally over. The children could at last live happily, free from Renki's grasp, unlike in the original story. Roland expressed his relief with excitement. They would never have to fear being scolded again. But as Karina considered the route they were taking, she realized the carriage was bound for Torres. She recalled the name from the story. Torres was a place associated with danger for Roland. Duke Claude Torres, known as the genius fanatic, was infamous for his obsessive and scrupulous methods of recruiting talented individuals. Roland, being a mage of immense potential, had been one of the Duke's targets, but he had consistently refused the Duke's invitations. Worry began to gnaw at Karina as she realized they might be heading towards someone who could jeopardize their escape. Karina's apprehension deepened as the carriage arrived in Torres. She remembered the dark future that awaited Roland if the Duke recognized his talent. After being spurned by Roland countless times, Duke Claude Torres harbored a deep grudge. His obsessive and cruel nature led him to relentlessly trouble Roland, no matter where the boy moved. This condemned Roland to a life of solitude, as no one dared approach him due to his ongoing conflict with the Duke. It was a tragic fate, one Karina desperately wanted Roland to avoid. If the Duke recognized Roland's potential again, it would mark the end of his happiness. Upon their arrival in Torres, the tense atmosphere was broken by Melissa's excitement as she eagerly pointed out the many interesting sights around them, while Roland smiled, commenting on the delicious aromas wafting through the air. Though glad to have arrived safely, the journey had depleted more resources than she had anticipated. With only 100 kivrin remaining, she knew expenses in the capital would be much higher, leaving her no choice but to find a way to earn more money. Failure to save enough could mean ending up on the streets. Recalling the original story, she knew the Duke of Torres wouldn't be interested in Roland, an 8-year-old boy. However, this did little to ease her concerns. Resolute, Karina decided she must find work and save money, despite the uncertain path ahead. She knelt before Roland and Melisa, explaining they would need to stay in Torres for a while to save enough money before heading to the capital. Both children readily agreed, expressing their support for the plan. They arrived at an inn where the owner charged Karina 10 kivrin for a night's stay, despite the sign outside advertising 5 kivrin. The owner explained the price was per person, but since the children were young, he was only charging for 2. Karina paid, and the owner then inquired about her relationship with the children, thinking quickly to avoid suspicion. Karina claimed to be their mother. The owner scrutinized her, but eventually accepted it, remarking that the children resembled their father more, before directing them to a room down the hall. Karina apologized to Roland and Melisa for claiming to be their mother without their permission. She explained it was necessary to avoid suspicion and asked if she could continue pretending to be their mother in similar situations. Roland happily agreed, saying it sounded wonderful, and Melisa beamed, adding she had always wished Karina was their mom. Roland added that he thought it would be nice to have her as a mother. Feeling a little shy but deeply touched, Karina realized how much they cared for her. Melisa excitedly asked if they could call her mom from now on, and Karina gladly agreed, pulling them both into a warm embrace. Karina left Melisa to rest while she went out to look for job opportunities. Melisa assured her they would stay inside, telling her not to worry. Karina faced multiple rejections from potential employers, most turning her away because she had 2 children to support. After 10 rejections, she finally arrived at a jewelry shop, hoping to find work. She nervously asked the elderly man inside about any openings. The man asked if she could tell the difference between a ruby and a garnet. Unsure, Karina asked him to explain. The man stated he only hired those who already possessed knowledge of gems, as he had no time for training from scratch. Desperate, Karina offered that she could learn quickly if given the chance. But the old man refused, stating he couldn't waste time teaching. Dejected, Karina left the shop, feeling utterly defeated after the rejection. Just as Karina decided to give up for the day, someone arrived, calling out the old man's name, Wilder, asking him to appraise a magic crystal. Wilder responded quickly, telling the visitor to wait upstairs. Sighing wearily, Karina noticed a glittering stone nearby. She looked at it curiously, noting its sparkle. Though it looked like an ordinary rock, something about it caught her eye. As she reached for it, she felt her hand move uncontrollably, almost hypnotized by its allure. Wilder yelled at her to step back, but Karina grabbed the stone and, in her panic, dropped it onto the floor, causing it to shatter. Suddenly, light erupted from the broken stone, and Karina felt a burning sensation spread through her body before collapsing to the ground. The man who had entered the shop earlier bent down and lifted her unconscious form. He splashed water on her face, and Karina felt a cool sensation on her skin as she regained consciousness, wondering what had just happened. She found herself lying in the arms of a strange, handsome man. Gasping in surprise, she instinctively pushed him away, causing him to stumble and fall to the floor. Witnessing this, Wilder addressed the man as Your Grace, concerned for his well-being. The man who had held Karina scolded her for pushing away the person who had just saved her, calling her rude. Karina, embarrassed, apologized and wondered aloud if the gemstone she had touched had exploded. The man explained that without his intervention, she would have died. Her body shattered along with the entire shop. He then reprimanded Wilder for displaying such a dangerous gem so openly. Karina was shocked to hear the word explosion and grew anxious when she heard the man address Wilder, realizing Wilder had called him Your Grace. The man introduced himself as Duke Torres. Karina, still uncertain, introduced herself as Karina Bleuet. The Duke remarked that he had never heard the surname Bleuet, and Karina explained she had recently moved from another city. Karina felt apprehensive, wondering why Duke Torres would unexpectedly appear in an ordinary jewelry shop. She recalled from the original story how Duke Torres became the source of all Roland's suffering in his adulthood. Roland had always been at odds with the Duke. Commoners avoided him, while nobles and royalty vied to recruit him due to rumors of his extraordinary talents recognized by the so-called genius fanatic, Torres. This led various factions to compete for Roland, hoping to bring him into their fold. Consequently, Roland was pushed further away from the life he desired, a simple existence with the person he loved. Karina worried that if Roland became entangled with the Duke, he would suffer the same fate. Determined to prevent this, she intended to leave the shop. She bowed to the Duke, thanking him for saving her, but just as she was about to leave, he called out to her. Karina flinched at the sound. Duke Torres, having overheard Karina's earlier conversation, asked if she was looking for work. Karina confirmed, mentioning that Wilder was looking for someone knowledgeable about gemstones. Just as she prepared to leave again, Wilder hastily offered her a job, revealing he would pay her 900 kevin a month, enough to support her children. Karina was astonished by the generous offer, realizing it could help feed her children, yet she hesitated. She feared accepting the job might lead to Roland getting involved with Duke Torres, the very thing she wanted to avoid. Karina thanked Wilder, but declined the offer, stating she didn't think she was suitable for the position, and bid him farewell. Wilder, surprised, tried to stop her from leaving. After their meal, both Melisa and Roland declared they were full. However, Melissa's stomach rumbled, and she lied about being stuffed, though she was clearly still hungry. Karina looked at her children, her heart heavy with worry. Melisa didn't even dare admit she was hungry, aware of their financial struggles. Karina reflected on their situation, growing increasingly concerned. The thought of not having enough food weighed heavily on her. She remembered Wilder's job offer of 900 kevin a month, enough money to buy food and even fund their journey to the capital. The idea of rejecting such a job to avoid involving her children in the jewelry shop incident crossed her mind, but she realized that with that money, they wouldn't have to worry about food and their circumstances would improve. Her resolve hardening, Karina decided to go buy food immediately, knowing it was the best option for them and hoping to avoid bringing the children back to the jewelry shop. Joy spread across Roland's and Melissa's faces as they anticipated the food Karina would bring back. Karina reassured herself that she would only work at the jewelry shop for a short time, remaining vigilant so Roland wouldn't encounter the Duke. She headed towards Wilder's shop, finding both Wilder and the Duke still there. Seeing the Duke again made Karina nervous. She greeted him, thanking him once more for his help the previous day. She wondered why the Duke was there and if he was very busy. But the Duke ignored her thanks, asking what she was doing here. Wilder seemed to wonder if Karina had changed her mind about the job offer. Karina asked if the job was still available and if she could truly earn that monthly salary. Wilder confirmed the offer, inviting her to sit down and sign the contract. Karina agreed to sign, but on two conditions. She demanded an explanation for the magical power outburst that occurred the previous day and whether the stone she touched was a magic crystal. She expressed concern for her own safety, stating she was responsible for the children and couldn't risk injury or death. Wilder hesitated slightly, but the Duke intervened, explaining that the outburst wasn't Karina's fault, but rather Wilder's carelessness in leaving a dangerous item lying around. Confused, Karina asked for further clarification. Wilder admitted he hadn't expected anyone nearby capable of triggering such an outburst. Karina, bewildered by the explosion she had experienced, asked why it had happened to her. The Duke explained that she possessed the potential to become a mage. He revealed the outburst was a mage's mana explosion, which only occurs under 3 circumstances: when a mage attempts a spell they haven't mastered, when they disregard the limits of magic, or when they fail to tame an uncontrolled magic crystal. He theorized that the magic crystal had reacted to her mana after being exposed for some time. Karina, having never encountered or studied magic, remained perplexed. She pointed out that she hadn't used any magic. The Duke then clarified that it was her potential that caused the outburst. He added that while magical power was rare in Torres, with only a few born with the aptitude to become mages, even those with innate talent required training and practice to truly become one. Wilder acknowledged his negligence, but assured Karina things would change if she started working there. He promised stricter management of the magic crystals to prevent incidents like the previous days from recurring. Karina then stated her second condition. If she ever decided to resign, they must let her leave immediately, no questions asked. Wilder hesitated, but was cut off by the Duke, who confidently agreed, assuring Karina that Wilder would treat her so well she wouldn't want to leave. Wilder reluctantly consented, and Karina accepted the job. The Duke immediately assigned a task, asking Karina to examine some items. Wilder brought out a box containing unbalanced magic crystals and worried aloud about how long it would take to appraise them all. Karina recalled the term unbalanced magic crystals, realizing she had never encountered it before, not even while working with Renki, who handled various crystals. Wilder encouraged her to examine the crystals carefully, explaining this would be her primary duty going forward. Hesitantly, she agreed and began her inspection. As Karina examined the stones, she noticed one faintly shimmering. Startled, she gasped inwardly. The Duke asked if she saw something unusual, but Wilder dismissed it, claiming the crystals all looked the same. Ignoring Wilder, the Duke urged Karina to voice her thoughts. Karina picked up the shimmering stone, stating confidently that only one among the crystals was a genuine magic crystal. Wilder was stunned, questioning how she could identify it so quickly. Karina confidently pointed to the true magic crystal, indicating it was the real one. The Duke observed her with a satisfied smile, musing on her innate talent for identifying magic crystals and reaffirming his belief in her extraordinary abilities. He thanked her and announced he would personally inspect the crystal she had chosen, leaving Wilder to handle the rest. Wilder protested, stating the workload was too much. But the Duke departed without further discussion. Wilder sighed in resignation, acknowledging the daunting task ahead. However, he also recognized Karina's remarkable skill, conceding the Duke had a sharp eye for talent. He welcomed Karina as his new employee. She shook his hand gratefully, her face lit with a pleasant smile as she expressed her thanks. Karina reflected on her first week working at the jewelry shop, finding the tasks relatively easy aside from the miscellaneous chores. She spent her time learning from Wilder about common gemstones like rubies and garnets. However, Wilder avoided teaching her much about magic crystals, instead asking for her insights each time she examined one. While sweeping, Karina muttered the Duke's name her thoughts consumed by his relationship with Wilder, which unsettled her. Wilder overheard and casually asked why she had brought up the Duke. Startled, she quickly lied, saying she had merely noticed his absence over the past few days. Wilder speculated that the Duke was likely busy dealing with the unbalanced magic crystal he had taken, mentioning that the Duke had been obsessed with studying magic crystals since childhood. Karina mulled over Wilder's words, realizing he and the Duke must have known each other for a very long time. Wilder stopped Karina from her sweeping, instructing her instead to examine the magic crystals and share her observations. Karina complied. After a short while, Wilder expressed his admiration for her natural ability to identify magic crystals with ease. He praised her talent, confidently predicting that within 3 years, she could own a shop much larger than his. Hesitantly, Karina asked if this meant she could become a magic crystal merchant. Wilder suggested she could aim higher, perhaps becoming a magic merchant, adding that the only drawback was dealing with gloomy individuals like mages. Curious, Karina asked if Duke Torres was also a mage. Wilder looked surprised and was just about to reveal something about the Duke when the chime of the bell above the door interrupted him. Karina turned to greet the visitor. Seeing the Duke, she offered a hesitant greeting. The Duke responded, acknowledging that they met again. Wilder seized the moment, remarking that the Duke's timing was impeccable, as they had just been talking about him. The Duke appeared slightly surprised. He glanced towards Karina, who flinched and nervously explained that his name had come up during their discussion about magic crystals. The Duke acknowledged this with interest, remarking that his arrival was indeed quite coincidental. The Duke handed Wilder a pouch. Wilder inquired if it was from the royal family. The Duke confirmed it was, but mentioned that the item had caused him some trouble. Wilder grumbled that, in the end, he would be the one left to deal with it. When the Duke questioned his complaint, Wilder quickly changed the subject, handing the pouch to Karina and asking her to inspect its contents. As Karina examined the item inside the pouch, she immediately sensed a palpable danger. She hesitated before warning Wilder, explaining that the feeling was very similar to the magic crystal she encountered during her first visit to the shop, and predicted it might erupt soon. Alarmed, the Duke swiftly snatched the pouch from her hand, cursing under his breath as he recognized the urgency of the situation. He retrieved a crystal from the pouch, clearly frustrated, questioning how someone could have given him such a perilous item. The crystal pulsed with an ominous light in his hand. Wilder pointed towards the Duke, telling Karina to watch closely, implying that the answer to the question she had been pondering was about to be revealed. The Duke clenched his fist tightly around the crystal. Karina watched in confusion, thinking that he didn't seem like a mage. She wondered if he possessed an ability to utilize magic crystals in a way that wasn't conventional magic. Just as the Duke opened his fist, a brilliant flash of light erupted, transforming the crystal into something unrecognizable. Karina curiously noted a shape beginning to form within his hand. Suddenly, the crystal shattered violently, engulfing the area in thick smoke. Amidst the haze, Karina coughed, trying to comprehend what had just transpired. As the smoke began to clear, her eyes widened to the sight of what the Duke now held in his hand. She realized with disbelief that it was a sword forged entirely from magic crystal. The Duke smiled with satisfaction, remarking that his attempt had succeeded this time. Wilder, astonished, asked, "What do you mean this time?" The Duke explained that he had previously attempted to draw the magic sword from the crystal that had reacted to Karina, but had failed. Wilder scolded him, reminding him to be careful, but the Duke dismissed his concerns, asserting that he rarely made mistakes. Wilder grew frustrated, warning the Duke that if something went wrong, he would be the one left to deal with the consequences. The Duke noted, slightly amused, that Wilder seemed to be lecturing him more often lately. Turning his attention to Karina, the Duke silently contemplated her abilities. He realized that her immediate recognition of the crystal's potential to become a sword indicated she was far more gifted than he had initially perceived. The Duke expressed his gratitude, acknowledging her help in preventing the magic crystal, a gift from the Emperor, from exploding. He offered her a reward, but Karina politely declined, stating she would prefer an explanation of what had just occurred. Surprised, the Duke confirmed if that was truly all she desired, and Karina assured him it was. Karina hesitated, but decided not to refuse his reward further if the Duke insisted. The Duke began by revealing his identity as a magic knight, but Wilder interrupted, questioning how Karina could possibly understand such a vague explanation and pointing out the dramatic pose he had suddenly struck. Annoyed by Wilder's remark, the Duke defended himself, stating he was just about to elaborate. Karina observed their interaction, curious about their relationship given Wilder's casual manner of speaking to the Duke. The Duke explained that magic knights were individuals capable of extracting magic swords from magic crystals. He added that experienced knights could wield these swords even without magical ability, comparing their role to that of a blacksmith. Seeking clarification, Karina asked if the swords were essentially objects formed from concentrated magic power, which the Duke confirmed. Karina commented that she could sense dangerous magic emanating from the sword. Startled, the Duke quickly handed the sword to Wilder, instructing him to store it safely. Approaching Karina, the Duke remarked that while he had encountered many talented individuals, he had never met someone with abilities quite like hers. Flustered, Karina murmured that it was an honor. The Duke then mentioned his late parents and how disappointed they might have been had he missed this opportunity. Taking her hand, he formally asked Karina to accept his offer, leaving her bewildered and surprised. He proposed that she become a vassal of House Torres. Caught off guard, Karina wondered why the Duke would make such a proposal, especially since vassals of his standing usually came from knightly families. She also found his dramatic, proposal-like gesture perplexing. The Duke asked if Karina would accept his offer. Karina hesitantly asked how a commoner, like herself, could serve him. The Duke chuckled reassuringly, explaining that half of his vassals were commoners, as most nobles of House Torres had moved to the capital, viewing this region as either the countryside or vacation spot. He added that even Wilder, who had never been a knight, served as a vassal and had supported his parents for years, knowing the Duke since he was young. The Duke repeated his question, asking if she would accept now. With a troubled expression, Karina mentioned her children and their needs. The Duke countered that working for him would allow her to provide for them better, as he would pay her significantly more than her current job. Still hesitant, Karina pondered the duties of a Duke's vassal. The Duke acknowledged that such a role indeed came with many responsibilities. Karina contemplated the offer, realizing that accepting it would mean sacrificing time with her children, a price she was unwilling to pay. Bowing politely, she declined the Duke's offer, expressing her gratitude, but stating she could not pledge her allegiance to him. The Duke inquired about her reasons, suspecting it might be because of her children. Karina confirmed this, explaining that her children were her priority and she could not allow anything to take time away from them. The Duke seemed relieved, saying he was glad her refusal wasn't for any other reason. When Karina asked curiously what he meant, he joked that perhaps she was avoiding him. Karina denied it in a fluster, though she wondered if her discomfort around him had been noticeable. The Duke chuckled, assuring her it was just a jest before changing the subject, asking if her children were adjusting well. Still slightly dazed, Karina quickly replied that they were settling in nicely. Karina found herself captivated by the Duke's smile, thinking how handsome he looked. The Duke continued the conversation, asking if her children enjoyed school. Karina, taken aback, answered affirmatively, but was puzzled by his question. Wilder interjected, explaining that Karina had previously lived in the mountains and was unfamiliar with life in Torres. The Duke appeared surprised, asking if children in rural areas weren't required to attend school. Wilder mentioned that many regions didn't enforce such rules and began explaining to Karina. He mentioned that Torres had institutions called schools, established for families who couldn't afford private tutors. Karina listened with interest, inwardly thinking how these schools reminded her of the ones she attended in her past life. Curiously, Karina asked the Duke what subjects were taught in schools. The Duke vaguely replied that mathematics and writing were included, which surprised Karina. She wondered aloud if that was all the children learned, suggesting the inclusion of more complex mathematical formulas, recalling she had learned such things in school during her previous life. Wilder scoffed at her suggestion, pointing out that parents would likely complain if schools taught subjects that didn't help children earn a living. Embarrassed, Karina awkwardly agreed. Later that evening, upon returning to the inn, Karina contemplated the idea of sending her children to school. She considered that attending school would allow them to make friends their own age, but felt that children's opinions mattered most. Resolute, she decided to ask them what they thought about it. Pleased with the bag of cookies she had bought, Karina looked forward to sharing them with her children. Mulling over the school discussion, she entered their room, calling out cheerfully for Roland and Melisa, but her excitement turned to shock as she noticed the room was in utter disarray. Seeing the chaos, she dropped the bag in her hands, horrified, realizing the place looked as though it had been ransacked. Panic seized her as she frantically searched for her children, screaming their names. Tears streamed down her face when she couldn't find them. She blamed herself for leaving them alone, for failing to protect them. Her thoughts quickly turned to Renki, the only person she could think of who might kidnap her children. Karina heard a faint voice calling her name, recognizing it as Roland's. Realizing he was in the bathroom, she rushed towards the door, bursting in and calling out to him. She found Roland and Melisa looking grimy and distressed. Relief washed over her, and she collapsed onto the floor, thankful they were safe. Roland nervously explained they had tried to clean up some spilled flour, and Karina realized the mess was from batter, not an intruder. Both children began to sob, apologizing for messing up the room and the bathroom. Karina reassured them she wouldn't scold them and asked what had happened. Roland confessed they had tried to use magic to bake delicious bread, but failed, as their uncle had never taught them how to use magic for baking. Karina embraced both children, comforting them, acknowledging they must have been terrified. She reflected on how Renki had only taught them destructive magic, leaving them unskilled in practical applications like cooking. Although she worried their traumatic experience might make them resent magic, she felt a sliver of relief that this wasn't the case. Noticing Melisa hiding something behind her back, she gently inquired. Melisa produced a dirty blanket, and Karina reassured her she would wash it. She then encouraged the children to wash up first, to which Melisa tearfully agreed. While cleaning, Karina was reminded of the difficult days past when she had to tidy up Renki's laboratory, scrubbing away the remnants of mysterious creatures stuck to the walls, a memory that still gave her goosebumps. Roland and Melisa ran over excitedly, offering to help, but she playfully pointed out the mess still clinging to their hair. She suggested they give themselves a good wash before lending a hand. Realizing this, the children scurried back to get themselves properly cleaned up. After the cleanup was finished, Karina felt utterly exhausted and suggested they all take a break. Roland, his eyes welling up with tears, felt guilty, believing their actions had caused her fatigue. He wondered if she no longer needed them, expressing his wish for her to always be happy and smiling. Startled by his words, Karina tried to comfort him with a gentle laugh. Karina reassured Roland and Melisa, telling them not to worry, as their very presence brought a smile to her face every day. She explained that while Renki hadn't taught her magic, he had acknowledged her talent but opposed her using it, which paradoxically only fueled her curiosity about magic. Although she had focused on enduring rigorous training in other areas, which helped her clean up the mess efficiently, Roland remained upset, insisting he didn't want to see her suffer. He promised not to cause any more trouble. Karina lovingly stroked his head. She explained that his mistake wasn't making the mess, but trying to handle everything alone. She encouraged him to ask for her help whenever things felt difficult. Despite her reassurance, Roland hesitated, worried about becoming a burden. Karina embraced Roland, assuring him that nothing could ever be a burden as long as she had him and Melisa. When he sought confirmation, she lovingly affirmed it once more, encouraging him to seek her help from now on. Roland calmed down and agreed. Later, as Roland dozed off, Karina gently tidied Melissa's hair and asked if the two children wanted to go to school. Melisa reacted with shock, while Roland hesitated, asking what they would do there. Karina explained they would learn math and writing, but not magic, realizing that magic was all they had known so far. She highlighted the opportunity to make friends their own age. The idea excited both Roland and Melisa, who eagerly expressed their desire to attend school, their faces beaming with enthusiasm. A few days later, Karina, visibly nervous, was reflecting on Roland and Melissa's first day at school. She worried they might be bullied or disliked by other children for being too smart, deciding to take it slow and ask them about their school experience later. When Roland and Melisa returned, Melisa excitedly rushed to hug Karina, sharing that she had fun and the teacher had praised her reading skills. Karina praised her warmly before asking Roland how his day went. Unlike Melisa, Roland hesitated, quietly replying that he had fun, but he looked somewhat downcast. Noticing his expression, Karina gently asked if something had happened, but Roland denied it. Karina understood he might not be ready to talk yet. Karina hugged him, assuring him he could share anything whenever he felt ready. Roland quietly agreed. That evening, Karina and Roland shared a quiet moment. Karina offered him a cup of honey tea, which Roland drank, remarking that it tasted good. Karina gently suggested they speak softly so as not to wake Melisa, and Roland agreed. Carefully, Karina asked if Roland had made many new friends at school. Roland looked sad, shaking his head and saying he didn't need any other friends. He only needed Melisa. Karina pondered his response. She realized that Roland and Melisa had never been separated before. The only time they were apart was when Roland's spell failed, and Melisa took the punishment for him. Now, being away from her for hours each day at school must feel overwhelming for him, especially since they had to be in different classrooms. Karina gently asked Roland if he was unhappy because he didn't want to play with other friends. Hesitantly, Roland admitted he thought he could stay with Melisa, but the teacher told him it wasn't possible. Realizing this was the issue, Karina listened as Roland explained they were separated because he was better at reading and writing than Melisa. He expressed regret, wishing he had pretended to be less capable so they could have been together. Karina sympathized, understanding how difficult it must be for him to be separated from his sister. Roland passionately declared that he had to protect Melisa and stay by her side until she grew up and became strong. Karina suspected his determination stemmed from the abuse Melisa had suffered at Renki's hands. When she asked if he was afraid Renki might find them, Roland nodded, revealing his lingering fear. To address this, Karina had an idea and proposed an alternative. Roland could personally help Melisa become stronger. Confused but curious, Roland asked what she meant. Karina explained to Roland that he could teach Melisa defensive magic. Roland hesitantly asked if Melisa would even want him to teach her. Karina reassured him that they could. Asked her first before deciding. Roland agreed, and Karina suggested waiting until the next morning since Melisa was asleep. Just as Karina was telling Roland it was time for bed, Melisa unexpectedly woke up, excitedly asking if she could really learn magic and thrilled to hear Roland would be her teacher. Both Karina and Roland were surprised by her enthusiasm. Melisa eagerly asked Roland what he would teach her first. Later, at Wilder's shop, Wilder handed Karina her wages, adding a little extra, saying he knew she must need the money since she had recently moved. Karina thanked him gratefully, thinking how Renki had never paid her a decent wage. Wilder mentioned that sales had increased since Karina started working, but cautioned her not to get her hopes up too high. Duke Claude approached, teasing that Wilder wasn't as generous as he seemed. He pointed out that not many bosses gave a bonus with the first paycheck, emphasizing it was a rare gesture. Karina chuckled, agreeing with Wilder's assessment, but assured Claude she would keep his advice in mind. She added with a smile that even a small bonus, like one Kevin, would make her happy. Wilder laughed, reminding her it was time to head home, as her children must be waiting. Karina thanked Wilder and left. Claude watched her go with a smile. On her way home, Karina felt excited about receiving her first paycheck and planned to ask the children if they wanted to eat out to celebrate. However, when she opened the door, she found Melisa crying and learned that Roland was sick. Karina rushed anxiously to Roland's side, noticing his high fever and heavy breathing. Melisa, distraught, cried and asked her mother what they should do. Karina immediately went out to find a doctor. Thankful she had noted the hospital's location beforehand. Despite her worry, she reminded herself not to jump to conclusions about the cause of Roland's sudden illness, or whether it was a consequence of her changing the future. A doctor arrived, stating he didn't usually make house calls at night, but would make an exception for double the usual fee. Karina winced at the cost, but focused on getting Roland treated. The doctor examined Roland and stated ominously that only God knew his future. Karina anxiously asked the doctor what he meant by that. The doctor explained that Roland seemed to have contracted patera, a disease with a high mortality rate. Even those who survived often suffered severe after effects, unable to lead normal lives, and no doctor in Torres could treat it. Hearing this, Karina's heart sank. Melisa began to cry, fearing for Roland's life. The doctor told them there was no cure for patera, but willow bar powder tea could help Roland's fever break, adding that his consultation fee was 300 kivrin, an amount he doubted they could afford. Karina paid the fee, and the doctor smirked, surprised she paid the exorbitant sum without hesitation before taking his leave. Filled with anxiety, Karina wondered if Roland was truly going to die. Roland woke up, asking if he was dying. Karina reassured him, saying he would grow into a healthy, strong adult. Roland asked if she had always known she would be their mother, and Karina affirmed that she had. Melisa entered with water, suggesting Roland take his medicine. Karina thanked her and continued to reassure them that Roland would be fine, despite the doctor's grim prognosis. She promised to find another doctor in the morning and urged Roland to take his medicine and rest. Roland took the medicine, bewildered, as Karina went to fetch a cool towel. Suddenly, Roland declared he was going to the orphanage. Karina was taken aback by Roland's abrupt talk of going to an orphanage. Roland explained that even though Renki was gone, they were still a burden to her. He believed their presence was the reason for her struggles. This deeply troubled Karina, and she immediately pulled Roland into a tight embrace. She assured him that without him and Melisa, she would never have been able to escape Renki's oppression. Karina explained that she had fled that place for their sake, and being with them now made her happier than ever before. She told Roland never to think of himself as a burden and, for her sake, never to speak of going to the orphanage again. She gently urged him to rest, comforting him that he would feel better after some sleep. After he drifted off, Karina recalled the horrific conditions of the orphanage, her heart clenching with fear. She remembered the children there being forced into unpaid labor, left to suffer even when ill. She knew Roland, having lived there before, understood these horrors all too well. Sending them back to such a place was unthinkable. Karina vowed to do everything in her power to earn their trust and assure them she would never abandon them. Later, another doctor came to examine Roland, delivering devastating news to Karina. Roland was suffering from Arco, a fatal disease with a high mortality rate. The doctor somberly noted that Roland was fortunate in one respect. The illness wasn't contagious, so Karina could stay by his side as he faced this uncertain fate. Overwhelmed by fear, Karina trembled at the doctor's detached words regarding Roland's condition. A sense of frustration welled up inside her as she handed over the consultation fee. She couldn't accept that the only course of action was prayer, especially when she didn't believe in such a passive deity. The conflicting diagnoses, Patera yesterday and Arco today, only deepened her confusion and fear. She wondered if Roland was truly facing an unknown, fatal illness, and if this was all happening because she had altered the future. Consumed by guilt, Karina thought Roland's illness might be her fault. But just as her anxiety reached its peak, the door was suddenly flung open, and a young female doctor entered. She asked if she was Karina. Confused yet hopeful, Karina hesitated as the young doctor introduced herself as Verity Solventine, sent by someone named Mr. Deviathan. Though unsure who he was, Karina allowed Verity to examine Roland, desperate for clarity. Focused and professional, Verity began by asking if Roland had any symptoms besides the fever. Karina recalled Roland mentioning stomach pains. Curious, Verity inquired about the previous doctors and their diagnoses. Karina explained that the first doctor mentioned Patera, the second said Arco, and the third claimed it was an unknown, incurable disease. Hearing this, Verity became visibly angry, denouncing the so-called doctors for their incompetence. In a confident tone, she revealed that Roland's ailment was no mysterious illness, but simple food poisoning. Karina found it utterly unbelievable, questioning Verity's diagnosis, unable to accept that Roland's life-threatening condition was merely something as common as food poisoning. Verity explained that while the symptoms were severe, it was indeed food poisoning, and Roland would recover with rest. She criticized the previous doctors for making incorrect diagnoses to exploit Karina, knowing that treating simple food poisoning wasn't profitable. Overwhelmed with relief, Karina collapsed to the floor, realizing Roland's illness wasn't a consequence of her altering events. Verity reassured her, explaining that the wrong medicine could have worsened his condition, but thankfully, Roland was now safe. She helped Karina up, refusing any payment, advising her to give Roland only water and thin porridge while monitoring his condition. She left her contact information should further assistance be needed. Filled with gratitude, Karina bowed repeatedly, thanking Verity for her help. Just as Verity was about to leave, Karina hastily called out to her, asking about Mr. Deviathan. eager to express her gratitude. Verity, with a knowing smile, hinted that Karina might already know who he was, and then departed. Startled, Karina pressed Verity for more information about Mr. Leviathan. Verity remained vague, suggesting the person might wish to remain anonymous, and promised to convey Karina's thanks. Karina stood there, bewildered, wondering who this mysterious benefactor could be. After Verity left, Melisa approached her mother, visibly shaken. Karina comforted her, patting her head and assuring her that Roland would soon recover. Melisa trembled, admitting her fear, and Karina embraced her, soothingly telling her everything would be all right. While comforting her daughter, Karina's thoughts drifted to Leviathan. She recalled seeing his name in the original story, but couldn't remember all the details, which frustrated her. Suddenly, a vivid memory from the novel surfaced in her mind. She recalled a scene where someone cruelly revealed to Roland that he was not a true member of the Renki family. The person mocked him, stating his mother had married a commoner and died without leaving an heir, emphasizing that neither Roland nor his sister shared any blood ties with the family. Karina winced as she remembered the scene, the weight of the revelation adding to her turmoil. Roland had cried out in anguish, demanding why he and Melisa had to suffer. His supposed uncle revealed the harsh truth. They were chosen solely because they possessed magic, a rarity among orphans. The orphanage director had sold them cheaply, even suggesting they pretend to be relatives to gain unrestricted control over their lives. Roland, trembling with fury, accused the man of lying to them. Clenching his fists, his voice choked with emotion, he confessed the only reason he hadn't killed the man was his belief in their familial bond. But now, knowing it was all a lie, his rage surged uncontrollably as he summoned his magic. The air around him grew heavy, crackling with power. The novel's memory flooded Karina's mind. She remembered the despair that consumed Roland upon learning the truth. Overwhelmed, he lost control of his magic, unleashing devastating power. By then, Roland had reached the level of an archmage, and his uncontrolled power obliterated all life in the surrounding area. After that catastrophic day, the world no longer revered him as an archmage. Instead, he became infamous as the slaughterer, the one who killed thousands in a single moment of despair. Experiencing another flashback to a forgotten piece of the story, Karina grew tense, this time recalling an event that left Roland deeply scarred for life. Determined to ensure her children's happiness, she resolved to do whatever it took. Later, at Wilder's shop, he noticed her improved mood and asked if her son was feeling better. She confirmed his recovery and apologized for her absence, but Wilder reassured her it was understandable given the circumstances. He jokingly suggested she work overtime to make up for the lost days, but quickly clarified it was just a jest. Karina thanked him for sending Dr. Salvatine to her home, but Wilder expressed surprise, stating he hadn't sent the doctor and doubted she would heed his orders anyway. When Karina mentioned the doctor was sent by Mr. Leviathan, Wilder looked puzzled, the name striking a faint chord of familiarity. Wilder, taken aback by the name, Mr. Leviathan, asked Karina if she was certain. Karina confirmed it and inquired if he knew the man. Wilder explained that Mr. Leviathan was one of their clients who had asked about her absence, and he had explained the reason to him. Karina clapped her hands in delight, realizing the name sounded familiar because he was a customer. Wilder conceded he hadn't been untruthful, but when Karina asked for Mr. Leviathan's address to thank him personally, Wilder demurred, promising instead to convey her gratitude himself. Later that evening, Karina dressed Roland and Melisa in fine clothes, reminding them to make a good impression on Mr. Leviathan. Roland agreed with fervor. Melisa eagerly asked Karina what Mr. Leviathan was like. Karina explained she had never met him before, but believed he must be a very kind person, as he had offered to visit them instead of having them come to his place. Roland passionately declared he would thank Mr. Leviathan himself for his help. Karina encouraged him, saying the visitor would be pleased to see him healthy and well. Just then, a knock sounded at the door, and Karina rushed excitedly to open it, expecting Mr. Leviathan. She began to welcome him, but froze, stunned to see Duke Torres standing there instead. Claude apologized, admitting it might be impolite, but he had wanted to visit at least once. Karina, though startled, composed herself and invited him in, despite feeling her home was far too modest for someone of his stature. She offered him a seat at the table while she went to prepare tea. Anxiety gnawed at Karina as she wondered if Duke Torres was, in fact, Mr. Leviathan, and worried that he might recognize Roland's potential to become an archmage. Meanwhile, Roland and Melisa stare at Claude in awe, clearly captivated by his presence. Melisa excitedly introduced herself and Roland, addressing him as Mr. Leviathan. Claude responded politely, saying it was a pleasure to meet them too. Karina hesitated, attempting to correct the children, explaining that he wasn't Mr. Leviathan. However, Claude interrupted her, confirming that he was indeed Mr. Leviathan. He clarified that his full name was Claude Leviathan Torres, with Torres being his title, and that he usually went by Claude Leviathan. Karina was dumbfounded, asking if he was the gentleman who had called the doctor. Claude admitted he was, explaining he thought she might refuse his help if she knew his identity. He assured her no disrespect was intended. Although Karina murmured that it was all right, she felt conflicted, knowing she couldn't truly demand an explanation from a duke. The atmosphere grew awkward for both Claude and Karina as they navigated the situation. Karina expressed her profound gratitude to Claude, acknowledging that she now owed him a double debt, first for saving her life and now for saving her son's. She bowed deeply before him, admitting she couldn't fully convey her thanks, but stressing the immense significance of his help as her son was alive because of him. Melisa beamed happily and also thanked Claude, calling him Mr. Leviathan. Karina quickly chided her, explaining it was improper to address him that way. However, Claude chuckled softly, reassuring Karina that it was quite all right, as Melisa was only a child. He humbly downplayed his actions, saying all he did was call Dr. Salvatine, and that no thanks were necessary. He then mentioned that Dr. Salvatine had informed him about the misdiagnosis given by the other doctors. Claude assured Karina that those doctors would face consequences. He expressed his anger, finding it unacceptable that they would deceive patients in such a wicked manner. Karina, in turn, voiced her relief and gratitude, stating she was glad to hear the negligent doctors were punished and hoped no one else would fall victim as she had. She also commended Claude for his dedication to managing his territory. Claude chuckled softly, thanking her for the kind words. Meanwhile, Roland stared curiously at Claude, catching his attention. Claude remarked that Roland was adorable before taking his leave. After his departure, Karina found herself murmuring aloud, finding the situation quite unusual. She questioned why a duke would come alone to such a humble street filled with run-down inns, and why he would sit at a small table with commoners. Melisa overheard her and asked what she found strange. Slightly flustered, Karina quickly explained she was wondering why the duke was being so kind to them. Roland asked with confusion, wasn't it good that he was kind to them? Karina reassured him it wasn't bad, but added that it was unusual for someone of Duke Torres' stature to show concern for commoners like them. Karina grew anxious, worrying that Claude might have realized Roland's potential to become an archmage. She regretted assuming Roland would be safe because he was young and resolved to ensure his talent remained hidden. Melisa suddenly suggested the Duke might like Karina, surprising her. Karina dismissed the idea, but Melisa insisted, sharing Roland's observation that Claude had been smiling at Karina when she wasn't looking. Karina laughed it off, but Roland chimed in, confirming that Claude had indeed been smiling at her whenever she turned her head slightly. Feeling a bit flustered, Karina told them they shouldn't say such things. When Roland asked why, Karina nervously explained that Duke Torres was a very high-ranking nobleman, and they could get into trouble if someone overheard and reported them saying such things about him. With their innocent charm, Melisa and Roland asked if Karina would report them to the police. Amused by their cuteness, Karina laughed and assured them she would never report such adorable children. She then explained that someone like Duke Torres would marry a beautiful lady, perhaps a princess. Melisa hugged Karina tightly, exclaiming that her mother was as beautiful as a princess too. Karina smiled warmly, thanking her, but insisted that Melisa and Roland were much prettier. However, Roland's face fell, seemingly lost in thought. Melisa chirped happily that she liked Duke Torres very much, comparing him to a prince and wishing he would visit them every day. But Roland fidgeted nervously, disagreeing and stating he didn't like the Duke. Surprised, Karina asked him why. Roland then voiced his concern, asking what would happen if the Duke wanted to marry her. Startled, Karina asked incredulously if he really thought the Duke would want to marry her. Trying to understand Roland's sudden worry, Karina gently asked why he thought that. Roland explained his fear, saying that since the Duke liked her, he might want to marry her and then come live with them. Smiling, Karina hugged him tightly, assuring him that would never happen, finding his thought process endearing. Still worried, Roland expressed that while he understood people liked her because she was pretty, he preferred it if it was just the three of them living together. Karina lovingly reassured him again, agreeing that she loved their little family too and promising nothing would change. Relieved, Roland asked for confirmation that they would always be together. Karina firmly replied that it would always be just the three of them, setting his mind at ease. As Karina prepared for bed, standing before the mirror, she noticed her hair was messy and tangled again. Embarrassed, she realized this might be why the Duke had been smiling at her. Her hair must have looked ridiculous. Despite being dressed neatly, she approached her children, asking why they hadn't told her about her hair, but they seemed perplexed. Roland genuinely hadn't thought anything was amiss, while Melisa cheerfully told her that her hair wasn't messy and actually looked pretty. Though hesitant, Karina smiled at their words, feeling slightly comforted. However, she still doubted if the Duke held any genuine interest in her, deeming herself insignificant for someone of his stature. Later, Karina reflected on how quickly the children had fallen asleep. She thought about her fear regarding Duke Torres meeting Roland and was surprised at how unexpectedly it had occurred. Yet, the Duke hadn't shown any reaction upon seeing Roland. Karina recalled that in the original story, the Duke had attempted to recruit Roland, but perhaps things were all right for now, as Roland was still young and not yet an archmage. She comforted herself that the Duke didn't even know Roland could use magic, so perhaps there wasn't much to worry about. The next day, at her workplace, Karina voiced her displeasure, stating she should have been informed about who Mr. Leviathan truly was so she could have prepared better. Wilder dismissed her complaints, calling her a liar and stating that even if she had known, she wouldn't have wanted to meet him. Speechless, Karina could only groan in response. Wilder added that even if Karina had known who Mr. Leviathan was, it wouldn't have changed her gratitude towards him. Karina conceded this was true, but maintained that being visited by a Duke was a significant event. Wilder chuckled lightly, explaining that it was the Duke who had insisted on secrecy, leaving him no choice. Still unhappy, Karina accused him of being too harsh with her. Acknowledging her frustration, Wilder told her to relax and come over, as she was about to learn a new task. Curious, Karina asked what the task was, but Wilder playfully told her to guess. She feigned contemplation, voicing her curiosity while secretly wishing he would just tell her directly. Wilder explained that recently, they had been receiving more young customers, especially since Karina started working there. These customers tended to look for accessories rather than gemstones. Since she was closer in age to them, he suggested she develop an eye for such items and serve those customers directly. He praised her for learning and adapting quickly, deciding they would start with this task. Wilder placed 2 expensive-looking items before Karina, asking her to evaluate which was better. Karina examined them closely, admitting they looked remarkably similar to her. This left Wilder aghast. He insisted that one was clearly superior, retorting who would possibly favor a larva. Karina hesitantly replied that she doubted anyone would prefer a pupa either. This prompted Wilder to elaborate further. He clarified that accessories were not just about appearance. They carried deeper meanings. A pupa, for instance, symbolized growth, transformation, breakthrough, and evolution, all concepts related to magic. Karina was taken aback by the mention of magic. Wilder explained that while a pupa might seem unremarkable externally, it tirelessly prepares for its next stage. When the time is right, it transforms into a beautiful butterfly, capable of soaring. He likened this process to mages, whose training is arduous and often feels futile. Yet those who persevere emerge as exceptional practitioners. He emphasized that enhancing magical power without understanding the underlying theory could be disastrous, as it leads to a lack of control. Magic spells without a solid foundation are like sandcastles, easily destroyed by rain. Wilder concluded by stating that it was important for gem merchants to have a basic understanding of magical theory, offering to teach Karina if possible. Karina clenched her fists determinedly, thinking that if she could learn the basics of magic from Wilder, she could pass that knowledge on to her children as well. She thanked him excitedly, promising to study hard. Later that evening, at home, Roland thoughtfully commented that he preferred the butterfly emerging from its chrysalis, and happiness bloomed on Karina's face, feeling reassured that Roland was indeed destined to be a mage. She praised him, saying he had done well. Roland curiously asked if the butterfly was the best answer. Karina explained Wilder's reasoning, stating that the chrysalis symbolized growth, transformation, and more. Roland listened intently, while Melisa looked bored and started to doze off. After Karina finished, she asked Roland if he understood. He replied with surprise, clearly impressed by her explanation. Melisa yawned, and Karina asked if she was bored and wanted to do something else. Melisa quickly replied that she wasn't bored, but wanted to do something more interesting, like learning cool, powerful magic spells that crackled and exploded. Melisa explained that Uncle had only taught Roland magic before, but she wanted to learn magic too. Roland interjected, saying he had promised to teach her magic, but couldn't because he had been sick. Melisa excitedly continued, saying she wanted to learn the kind of magic that sparkled, had powerful effects, crackled, and exploded. Karina cautioned worriedly that such magic was too dangerous for her, difficult to master, and could cause harm. Melisa pouted, clearly disappointed. Karina then suggested starting with a simple spell, hesitating as she tried to think of one. She wondered what kind of magic she knew, recalling Rankery's magic was too dangerous, and then thought of Duke Torres. She quickly realized his magic wasn't what she considered orthodox magic. Roland enthusiastically suggested a magic spell that makes plants grow. He said it wouldn't be dangerous, only enhancing the plant's energy, unlike wild animals or monsters that could cause harm. Karina appreciated Roland's enthusiasm for magic, glad to see he didn't dislike it as long as it wasn't dangerous. However, Melisa was unimpressed, thinking it sounded boring. Karina comforted Melisa, explaining that the reason she didn't want her learning dangerous magic was that she didn't want her to get hurt. Hearing her mother's concern, Melisa blinked in agreement, saying she would listen and be a good girl. Melisa excitedly fetched some dandelion puffs, and Roland suggested they use magic to make the flowers bloom. He handed one to Karina, but she was surprised, wondering why he gave her one too. Roland apologized, feeling a bit awkward about teaching her magic, since she had never learned before. Karina patted him reassuringly, thanking him for his thoughtfulness. She recalled how Rankery had never taught her magic, and now, with Roland teaching her something Rankery had strictly forbidden, it felt like a small victory. Roland then prepared to show her how to use the magic. Closing his eyes, Roland chanted a magic spell, emitting a green glow. He instructed everyone to focus on the dandelion and imagine it blooming. Melisa succeeded on her first try, making her dandelion bloom. She cheered excitedly at her success. Karina, though nervous, smiled, trying to stay calm for the children. As she focused on the dandelion, a luminous glow enveloped her, and a flash of magic appeared. To her surprise, she succeeded in making the plant bloom. Melisa cheered for her, while Roland praised her for succeeding on her first try. However, Karina noticed the flower bloomed in a cluster of 3, feeling they looked a bit strange. Melisa thought they were prettier, claiming they were 3 times more beautiful than usual. Feeling liberated from Rankery's control, a sense of freedom washed over Karina, and she suggested putting the flowers in a vase so they could admire them every day. Lisa and Roland happily agreed. They were eager to enjoy their creations. As they placed the flowers on the table, Karina savored how much this small act of magic meant to her. When it was time for dinner, Roland and Melisa excitedly requested ham sandwiches. Karina, ever the cook, suggested ham, cheese, and salad and baguettes. However, the children weren't thrilled with the idea, especially upon hearing about the salad. Melisa protested that she disliked vegetables, but Karina remained firm, insisting they needed to eat properly. She instructed them to go wash their hands while she prepared the salad. The siblings reluctantly agreed, knowing there was no escape. Still anxious about the loud noise, Karina quickly checked on Roland and Melisa. She feared it was an attack, her anxiety mounting. The room had shaken, and it seemed branches were sprouting from the apple. Her heart pounded as she shielded them from any potential danger, fearing the worst. Both Roland and Melisa were unharmed. Roland's light-hearted response, "It tickles," made her realize there was no immediate danger. As Karina turned, the source of the strange phenomenon became clear when she saw a tree growing out of the apple. Relieved, she laughed, realizing it was just a sprouting apple tree. Karina chuckled at the bizarre yet harmless sight. Is it an apple tree? Roland, noticing Karina seemed shocked, asked if she was all right. Karina hesitated slightly, downplaying her reaction and questioning if the strange occurrence was her fault, as it happened after she touched the apple. Roland was unsure, admitting he had never seen anything like it, nor heard of such a thing from Renki. Melisa suggested it might be related to the magic they had just used, specifically the spell that made the dandelions bloom. Roland agreed, considering it could be an aftereffect of their magic. Karina began to suspect that her own lack of control over her magic was the real issue, especially since Frankie had always discouraged her from using magic. She realized Frankie might have been afraid of her power. Melisa suggested using magic to remove the tree, but Karina immediately refused, warning that touching the tree might make it grow taller. Karina instead asked Melisa and Roland if they could help her deal with the tree this time. The siblings eagerly agreed, but requested a reward. They didn't want to eat salad for a while. They joked that the lettuce might grow too large. Karina was surprised by their request, but couldn't help but be amused by their playful logic. The next morning, on her way to work, Karina couldn't help but chuckle, thinking about how excited the children were about not having to eat salad. As she walked, she noticed a package outside the shop. Assuming it must be for Wilder, she took it inside. For a moment, she wondered if she should open it, but quickly decided against it, choosing to wait for Wilder. She placed the package on the counter. Wilder arrived at the shop, greeting Karina cheerfully as usual. He noticed the package and remarked it was likely more magic crystal from the Duke for him to evaluate, adding to his workload. He encouraged Karina to open it. As she began unwrapping the package, she marveled at the luxurious wrapping, feeling more like silk better than anything she owned. To her astonishment, the package contained not magic crystals, but flowers. Wilder was equally stunned by the discovery as the flowers bloomed around her. Panicked, he immediately yelled for her to take her hands off. Flustered, Karina quickly put the flowers down, apologizing. Wilder, now concerned, asked if she had been cursed by a sorcerer. Karina tried to reassure him, though she herself wasn't sure what was happening. She was about to explain when she felt something was wrong. Wilder scolded Karina for not telling him about the flowers sooner, expressing frustration that she hadn't mentioned it earlier. Karina apologized, explaining she thought everything would be fine after a few days and assumed that since there were no plants in the shop, it wouldn't be a problem. She sighed, wondering aloud why the Duke would send flowers in the first place. Wilder, realizing she wasn't referring to her use of magic, but rather the Duke's peculiar behavior, muttered incredulously about the flowers. Understanding he meant the Duke, Karina quickly reassured him, stating she could handle the situation herself. However, Wilder insisted she stay out of it, claiming she would only complicate matters. He instructed her to simply wait, assuring her the symptoms would naturally fade within 3 days at most. Relieved by this news, Karina asked if she should avoid plants during that time. Wilder playfully quipped that she could perhaps take the opportunity to open a flower shop. Karina sighed, joking in return that if only she had the money, she'd quit her job and do just that. But alas, she didn't. Wilder chuckled, teasing that it was fortunate she wasn't so wealthy. They shared a smile. Then, growing serious, Karina asked Wilder if he had any idea why this strange phenomenon was happening to her. She recalled reading about a similar condition long ago in a book on magical theory. If what the book described was true, she might never be able to use magic again in her life. Hearing this possibility, Karina grew anxious, demanding to know why. Wilder explained that whenever Karina attempted magic, incidents like this, where things spiraled out of control, would occur because she couldn't manage her mana. He added that some individuals are born with exceptionally potent magical power, which must have been why the magic crystal reacted so strongly to her that day. Astonished, Karina asked if training could help her gain better control, despite being born with this power. Wilder replied that, according to the books he'd read, no such cases had ever been documented. Karina sighed, thinking her suspicions from the previous night were correct. Renki had forbidden her from using magic because it could potentially be dangerous to him. Wilder encouraged Karina not to be disheartened, acknowledging that while she couldn't wield magic, she undeniably possessed a magical gift. Karina questioned the value of such a gift if she couldn't properly utilize it. Wilder elaborated that her unique ability to perceive the aura of magic crystals, something others required years of study to achieve, was incredibly valuable. While others needed years to discern the quality of raw materials for magical tools, she could do so intuitively. He emphasized that even the Duke recognized her talent. He urged her to hone this skill, predicting she could become the finest magic merchant not just in Torres, but in the entire empire. Karina voiced her concern that handling magic crystals as a merchant might trigger another explosion. Wilder reassured her that such occurrences were rare. Furthermore, they could be managed with proper training, as long as she believed the magic crystals wouldn't control her. He highlighted the lucrative nature of the profession, mentioning she could provide a comfortable life for her children with money left over. Intrigued by the prospect, Karina looked at him with admiration. Noting her interest sparked by the mention of children, Wilder offered to help her become a magic merchant, suggesting she focus on jewelry for the time being. Feeling weary from cleaning, he excused himself to rest. Karina smiled in agreement, assuring him she would manage the work. That evening, at the Duke of Torres' residence, Duke Claude stood by the window, seemingly lost in thought. Noticing his contemplative mood, Lord Chichester, the steward of the Torres household, hesitated before asking if something was troubling him. Claude dismissed the notion. He explained with a faint smile that he was merely reflecting on his own shortcomings. Surprised, Lord Chichester insisted that it was impossible for Claude to have done anything wrong. Claude thanked him for the reassurance, admitting he felt the rejection was his own fault. While he had anticipated being turned down numerous times, he hadn't expected such a firm refusal. He recalled sending a formal invitation, accompanied by flowers from his own garden, only to be utterly ignored, an outcome he found quite mortifying. Lord Chichester inquired who had rejected the Duke this time, prompting Claude to reveal it was Madame Bleuet. Wilder's aide, an irate Lord Chichester, voiced his disdain for Wilder, branding him an ungrateful commoner who frequently spoke ill of the Duke. Claude chuckled, telling him to cease his dislike for Wilder, reminding him that Wilder wasn't truly like that. Chichester grumbled, vowing to teach Wilder a lesson someday. Claude calmly stated that the rejection must have been Madame Bleuet's own choice. Chichester speculated that she surely hadn't seen the Duke's face, as no lady in the Empire would refuse him after witnessing his handsome features. Claude laughed, teasing Chichester for speaking like a child. Chichester explained it was because he had known Claude since childhood. Claude jested whether Chichester was blinded by his affection for him, startling the Chamberlain into a soft chuckle. Claude assured him it was merely a joke. Lord Chichester hesitated, conceding his earlier comment wasn't entirely wrong, before inquiring about the kind of person Madame Bleuet was. Claude explained she hailed from the north. Chichester grew wary, guessing she might only be staying temporarily in Torres before heading to the capital. Seeing the look on Claude's face that seemed to ask what was wrong with that, Chichester groaned inwardly. With a sigh, Chichester expressed his opposition to the Duke's idea of recruiting Madame Bleuet. He reminded Claude that Lord Tails had only left 2 months prior. However, Claude's expression turned cold as he firmly cut Chichester off, correcting him that it shouldn't be called betrayal. Chichester persisted, arguing that Lord Tails had indeed betrayed him, considering Claude had spent years nurturing a mere servant into a knight. He painfully recalled how Tails left, citing a dream of buying a house in the capital, and lamented how many others had done the same after benefiting from Claude's mentorship. Claude grew stern now, silencing Chichester, forbidding him from speaking ill of those who had once offered him their complete loyalty. Lord Chichester hesitated, then sighed, remarking on how excessively generous Duke Claude was. He voiced concerns about Madame Bleuet, a commoner from the north planning to move to the capital, predicting her path would likely end the same as the others. Claude, however, dismissed his worries, pointing out that Madame Bleuet seemed unambitious and was raising 2 children, meaning she couldn't afford to take risks. Chichester remained unconvinced, arguing that money often changed people and questioning why Claude was so determined to recruit her. Claude offered a faint smile, acknowledging her incredible talent for discerning magical crystals. He started to say something more, but stopped mid-sentence. A puzzled Chichester urged him to finish, but Claude waved it off, deciding he should try persuading her one more time. A surprised Chichester asked how he planned to do that. Claude confidently replied that he had it all planned. Her talent was too extraordinary to pass up. As Claude headed towards Wilder's shop, he was resolute in his determination to convince Karina, recognizing that her gift for identifying magic crystals was crucial for Torres. He believed her skills would attract knights seeking magical swords. It was an opportunity he could not afford to lose. Upon entering the shop, the doorbell chimed, and Karina greeted him warmly, recognizing him. She gasped, curtsied, surprised by his visit. She informed him Wilder wouldn't arrive until the afternoon, wondering inwardly about the reason for his presence. Claude clarified he wasn't there to see Wilder. A confused Karina asked if he was inspecting his territory, to which he replied that his visit was for the development of Torres. When asked if he conducted such inspections often, Claude admitted he did so more frequently than other lords. Karina praised him, attributing the pleasantness of Torres to his dedication and care. This drew a modest laugh from Claude. The atmosphere between Claude and Karina grew awkward, as it often did. Karina, unsure of what to say, thinking there was nothing left to discuss, she wondered why he hadn't left yet. Claude hesitated for a moment, but finally mustered the courage to speak. Addressing her directly, he brought up the response to the invitation he had sent earlier. Karina, confused, asked him what invitation he was referring to. Claude explained it was the one he had delivered to the shop, sent along with the flowers. Karina flinched, realizing there might have been an invitation hidden within the bouquet. Panic began to set in as she anxiously considered the possibility that she had ignored an invitation from a duke, fearing the potential consequences. Claude's tone turned cold as he expressed his disappointment. He reminded her of his efforts to help her settle in Torres, and how highly he valued her talents, which led him to offer her a position serving his family. He accused her of disrespectfully rejecting his offer and ignoring his invitation, making it clear he could no longer tolerate her behavior. Trembling with fear, Karina quickly denied the accusation. With an icy gaze, Claude warned that anyone who disrespected him would face the consequences. Karina, frantic, cried out for him to listen to her explanation. She told him that on the day the invitation arrived, the shop was in chaos, and she hadn't even noticed an invitation amidst the clutter. Claude questioned if that was entirely true. Tearfully, Karina assured him it was. She worried his temper might cause him to lash out suddenly, just like in the original story. Claude sighed in relief, smiling as he stated it was his misunderstanding. He had thought she ignored his invitation. Surprised, Karina apologized, but Claude reassured her she had done nothing wrong. She stood stunned, realizing he didn't seem like the scoundrel she had anticipated. Claude informed her he would send another invitation soon, hoping it wouldn't be refused this time, as he still wanted her. Karina blushed, startled by the implication in Claude's words. She wondered if his interest lay in her magical talents, given his reputation for scouting talented individuals, but she couldn't shake off the awkwardness caused by his phrasing. As he prepared to leave, Karina quickly responded, telling him to take care. She remained flustered by the encounter. Soon after, a man arrived carrying a package. He asked if he had the right place, and if he was speaking to Mr. Wilder. Karina confirmed the location and took the box from him, staring at it nervously. She wondered if something unusual would happen again, like before. Noticing a letter from a guild she had never heard of, Karina assumed it might be a new trading partner of Mr. Wilder's. She decided to set the letter aside for the time being. Meanwhile, Claude was returning to his palace. He couldn't stop thinking about Karina's rare magical talent and his determination to have her serve the Torres family. Suddenly, he heard a rumbling sound and looked around, puzzled. It was followed by a loud crash. Worry immediately surged within him. The jewelry shop, Wilder's shop, was under attack, and Karina was inside alone. Without hesitation, shouting her name, he dashed towards the shop. Panic-stricken, there was no time to waste. He had to reach her as quickly as possible. Summoning his magic, he materialized a glowing sword. Intricate patterns formed from his magic as he focused his concentration, attempting to break the shield that trapped Karina inside. He slashed through the magical barrier with his luminous sword, determined to reach her. Karina explained that a guild had sent a package for Mr. Wilder, and as she opened it to reveal the contents, a magic crystal, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her chest. This pain was far more intense than the last time she encountered a crystal eruption. The entire shop began to shake, and Karina didn't know how to handle the situation. But just as she tried to comprehend what was happening, the pain ceased, and Claude entered the shop. Visibly angered, Claude realized he had arrived too late. He cursed the attacker's actions, knowing their target was Wilder, who had once worked for the Torres family. Karina, still bewildered, asked if this meant they were trying to threaten the Torres family and questioned why anyone would want to make an enemy of Claude. Claude explained that the situation wasn't a simple fight. The attackers coveted the Torres estate, renowned for its fertile lands and thus a target for many. He expressed regret for not informing Karina sooner, as she could have been endangered because of it. Karina reassured him that she was unharmed and the pain had subsided. However, Claude warned her that while the mark left on her chest wouldn't directly harm her, it allowed the caster to track her location, no matter where she went. Karina worried that if the attackers knew she was marked, they might cease their pursuit. Claude countered that this was uncertain, as they might perceive her as a threat, and once they realized he intended to recruit her, they might consider eliminating her to prevent future complications. Karina grew anxious for her children's safety, fearing they would become targets because of her. Desperate, she felt a pang of guilt for putting them in danger. Claude comforted her, vowing to protect both her and her children. When Karina demanded an explanation, Claude proposed she move into his mansion, an offer she hesitated to accept. Claude assured Karina that his mansion was the safest place in Torres. Despite the many attempts to infiltrate his estate, he explained that because so many coveted his lands, his mansion was fortified with exceptionally strong walls and guarded by a dedicated order of knights, making it even more secure than the imperial palace. He invited her to reside there, stating it was the safest option for her. Karina recoiled slightly at the offer, realizing that accepting it would likely mean she had no choice but to work for him. She worried that moving into his mansion would trap her in Torres forever. Uncertain about how to proceed, Karina began to ponder her situation. Roland would soon come of age, and once Claude saw his potential, he would undoubtedly recognize him as a potential archmage, and there was no doubt he would then stop at nothing to recruit Roland. She thought of their current life at the inn, where they were free and content, and the children were comfortable. Yet, she couldn't shake the fear for their safety, haunted by Claude's earlier words about the mark on her chest, the mark that allowed the caster to track her wherever she went. The danger to her and her children was real, and she couldn't guarantee their safety if they remained in hiding. Karina feared that if someone attacked them, as Claude had mentioned, none of them would survive. After some deliberation, she finally agreed to Claude's offer, but made a request in return. She asked him not to extend any invitation to her children to serve him. Claude chuckled, finding it somewhat amusing, as he typically only recruited talented adults. Feeling embarrassed, Karina asked why he was laughing. In response, he assured her that her children were still too young and that he hadn't been serious just now. Still uneasy, Karina didn't reply and avoided eye contact. Noticing her discomfort, Claude asked if that was truly the reason she was avoiding him. Karina quickly denied it, silently relieved that he hadn't noticed Roland's potential to become an archmage. Claude then promised he would ensure no one spoke ill of her or her children. Karina thanked him, gazing at him, wondering what his true intentions were. Karina, surprised, asked Claude why he was being so kind to her and the children. Claude smiled, explaining that as the Duke of Torres, it was his duty to protect the people of his domain, which was why he wanted to help them. The following afternoon, at Karina's residence, she informed Roland and Melisa that they would be temporarily staying at Claude's mansion, with Claude standing beside her. Melisa showed hesitation, asking if they really had to go to Claude's mansion. Karina reassured her, explaining that bad people were after them, so they needed to go somewhere safe. Nervously, Melisa asked if the bad person was Uncle Frankie, but Karina calmed her, saying it wasn't him and that he hadn't found them yet. Roland, equally frightened, also voiced his concerns. Karina comforted them both, though Melisa began to cry, not wanting to move to a new place. Karina hugged and consoled her, assuring her the new place would be safer and wasn't scary. Claude attempted to persuade Melisa and Roland, mentioning the delicious food available at his mansion and how they could find anything they liked there. However, Melisa pointed out that one should be polite when asking for favors. Embarrassed by her daughter's comment, Karina quickly covered her mouth, but Roland agreed with his sister, reminding Karina they had been taught to be polite when asking for things. This left Karina feeling frustrated. Claude chuckled nervously, remarking that the children certainly took after their mother. Karina, puzzled, asked him to clarify. Meanwhile, an excited Melisa asked if there was a princess at Claude's mansion, shocking Karina. Melisa eagerly pressed on, asking if there really was a princess at Claude's mansion. Claude smiled and confirmed, mentioning a very pretty princess from the south who would be delighted to meet her. Thrilled, Melisa expressed her desire to go, while Karina realized Claude must be referring to his daughter, beginning to understand his kindness, thinking he must be empathizing as a father. Yet, she also felt a twinge of disappointment for reasons she couldn't quite grasp. Karina then asked Roland if he wanted to go, and he readily agreed, saying he wanted to be somewhere safe for his family's sake. Pleased with their decision, Claude announced they had everyone's agreement, telling them to pack their belongings while he arranged for a carriage outside. Claude's luxurious carriage waited outside, making him slightly hesitant, feeling it might be a bit too extravagant. However, Roland and Melisa were ecstatic upon seeing it, and even Karina appreciated its beauty, especially since the children seemed so fond of it. Once settled, the carriage began its journey towards Claude's mansion. Inside, Roland and Melisa marveled, exclaiming they had never ridden in such a grand carriage before. Karina noticed the children touching the window frames and warned them against it, mentioning the dust and how dirty it could be. Claude, impressed by her sharp observation, commented on it. Caught off guard, Karina explained it was because she had worked as a maid before she was married. Claude paused, repeating the word before curiously, realizing her slip of the tongue. Karina laughed nervously, clarifying she meant before getting married. Claude accepted her explanation, while Karina mentally scolded herself for speaking so casually in front of the Duke. As the carriage neared the palace, Melisa excitedly pointed toward what she thought was the princess's castle, urging Karina to look. Karina glanced, surprised, at the magnificent structure. When they finally arrived and stepped out of the carriage, she found herself contemplating the reality of being there. Suddenly, Roland bolted away in panic, and a worried Karina called out to him. But he and Melisa froze in terror, trembling like small puppies, pleading for it to stay away, clearly terrified. Karina, bewildered, realized it was just a harmless puppy, but she noticed Roland had collapsed to the ground, overwhelmed by a traumatic memory. Flashbacks haunted Roland, recalling his Uncle Renki, forcing him to kill a dog with the magic he had just learned. In the present, Roland whimpered, his uncle's voice echoing in his mind. Karina rushed to his side, gathering him into her arms, anxiously checking if he was hurt or in pain. Claude, meanwhile, calmly picked up the puppy, noting the children's apparent fear of dogs. Karina confirmed this, explaining to herself that it must remind them of the dog's rancory used during their cruel magic training. To soothe Roland, Karina assured him this puppy was different from the one in his memory. She reminded him the other dog had a white spot on its head, helping him differentiate between the two. Slowly, Roland acknowledged this, responding with hesitant murmurs. When the puppy yipped, Roland flinched, trembling as he admitted he was still scared of dogs. Noticing the children's distress, Claude asked Karina if they were also afraid of cats. Karina, puzzled, explained that the children actually loved cats and had lived with one before. At the word kitty, Melissa's ears perked up and both children instantly brightened. Roland, momentarily forgetting his fear, excitedly asked Claude if he had cats, while Melisa enthusiastically repeated kitty. Amused by their sudden shift in mood, Claude told them they could see many kittens inside. Inside the mansion, the two children's eyes sparkled with excitement, eager to meet the cats. Watching their joy, Claude silently admired their cuteness, thinking how much they resembled their mother. Suddenly realizing where his thoughts were heading, Claude's face flushed with embarrassment. Within the palace, Claude showed the children the kittens, one of which was perched atop a sculpture, much to his chagrin. He privately wondered why it would roost in such an odd place. Melisa, delighted, greeted the kitten, calling out to it cheerfully. Claude began introducing the cats by name, including Daisy, Rose, and Marigold. Karina watched in surprise, unable to shake the thought that with so many cats, the mansion felt more like a feline sanctuary than a duke's residence. Afterwards, Claude led Karina and the children to a charming cottage on the estate grounds. standing outside. He informed Karina that this would be their new home. Karina felt a slight pang of disappointment, realizing they wouldn't be staying in the main mansion as she had expected. However, as she stepped inside, she was stunned by the beauty of the interior. It was a beautifully decorated and fully furnished home. Karina wondered in awe if it was too extravagant for her, feeling that she and her children didn't deserve such a place. Meanwhile, Roland and Melisa dashed excitedly through the cottage, exploring their new surroundings. Claude apologized, expressing regret that he couldn't offer Karina and her children better accommodations. Karina, surprised, assured him that the cottage was far more than they could have hoped for. Roland and Melisa explored their new home with glee. Roland declared he loved the place, while Melisa marveled at how shiny it was. Claude then mentioned he had something else to show Karina. As they walked, Karina noticed an array of magical ingredients, marveling at their rarity. She saw items like monster horns, which she had heard were exceedingly rare, and mermaid scales, said to be found only in the Forbidden Forest. Claude led her to a room, explaining that his cousin used to study magic here. He warned Karina that the room was dangerous and instructed her to keep the children away. Karina firmly relayed the instruction to Roland and Melisa, who obediently agreed not to enter. Claude expressed his concern that the children might get hurt, which made Karina take note of the way he treated Roland and Melisa. Just like ordinary children, she thought to herself, Claude hadn't noticed their gifts, and she found herself wondering about his true motives. She asked him why he had brought her to see this particular place. Claude revealed it was his gift to her, stepping closer and asking if she liked it. Karina blushed, surprised by his gesture. He explained that he believed she could become an excellent magical merchant and use this room to study magical materials. Although Karina felt flustered, she reiterated that due to her constitution, she shouldn't use magic, nor did she intend to work for him. Claude acknowledged both points. Karina questioned why Claude would go to such lengths for her. He explained it would be a waste not to give her a chance to hone her talents and live a better life. When Karina pointed out that her improved life offered him no benefit, Claude shared his conviction about uncovering hidden potential and nurturing it, even if those individuals eventually departed from Torres. Such endeavors, he stressed, helped make the world a better place. Claude confidently assured Karina that by the time she became a renowned magical merchant, she would have grown so fond of Torres that she'd wish to stay forever, and he vowed to make that happen. As Claude neared the room, he found Karina amidst chaos, the children arguing about what had caused the mess. Roland nervously explained they were hungry and looking for food when something appeared. Melisa tried to cover, insisting it was a kitten. Roland firmly denied it, pointing out the creature looked nothing like a cat. Melisa stubbornly retorted, claiming that despite its strange eyes and fur, it was still a kitten. Karina asked if the mess was caused by a cat, but Roland denied it, insisting it was something strange. Melisa, however, confidently declared it was a kitten. Claude intervened to ease the tension, agreeing that it was indeed a cat. Melissa's face lit up, feeling validated, and she teased Roland. Roland groaned in frustration, arguing the thing looked nothing like a cat. Claude attempted to explain, mentioning they had many unusually looking cats in the area. Observing Claude's vague explanation and reluctance to elaborate, Karina concluded it definitely wasn't a cat. Despite her doubts, she chose not to press further. Melissa's stomach rumbled, prompting Karina to offer to make her something to eat. Claude suggested calling for a cook, but Karina quickly refused, insisting it wasn't necessary. Claude disagreed, stating they needed a cook for proper meals, adding he would also arrange a tutor for the children immediately. Karina, overwhelmed by his generosity, tried to politely decline, saying it was too much. Claude assured her the teacher he had in mind was the best in his domain, as she tutored the Empire's finest students. Karina nervously considered the opportunity, thinking that under such a skilled teacher, her children might discover new talents and lead happier lives than before. She then asked if this was the same teacher Claude had mentioned earlier, the one who tutored the Southern Princess. He confirmed it was the same one. Karina hesitated, asking if it was really all right for her children to attend classes with Claude's daughter. Claude, surprised, clarified that Astrid wasn't his daughter, but his sister. Karina, confused, asked about the southern princess he'd mentioned before. Claude explained the princess was his sister and assured her it was fine for the children to attend classes together. Karina felt uneasy, insisting it wasn't appropriate for her children to attend classes with a noble lady like his sister. However, Claude firmly reminded her of his promise to provide the best teacher for her children. He added that he couldn't go back on his word, playfully asking if she wanted to make him a liar. Karina hastily clarified that she didn't mean to object, hesitating before asking if her children could truly receive lessons from the teacher Claude had mentioned. Claude smiled reassuringly, inquiring about the age of her eldest child. When Karina informed him that Roland was 8, Claude pointed out that his sister, Astrid, was 4 years older than Roland, suggesting the age gap might prevent them from attending classes together. Karina pondered the significant age difference, realizing Astrid was already 12, 15 years younger than Claude. Before she could dwell on it further, Claude firmly stated that the children's lessons should commence the following day to prevent them from falling behind. Karina agreed, though she expressed that there was no need for such haste. Claude dismissed her concerns, assuring her it wasn't rushed, and rang a bell to summon the teacher, asking for Terry. The teacher, Terry, knocked and entered, introducing herself politely. Claude welcomed her and introduced his guests, explaining he had a particular request for Terry. Terry quickly surmised that Claude wanted her to teach the two children, which Claude confirmed, suggesting she teach them separately, either before or after Astrid's lessons. However, Terry firmly refused. Surprised, Claude asked for her reason. Karina observed the unfolding situation, guessing Terry might be reluctant due to the children's commoner background. A crestfallen Roland and Melisa clung to their mother in despair. Karina gently comforted them, assuring them everything would be all right. Miss Terry sighed deeply, voicing her concerns about tutoring Lady Astrid. She explained that Astrid's studies were far advanced for her age, and despite dedicating her utmost effort to Astrid's education, Miss Terry found it increasingly difficult to keep pace. Astrid's progress was so remarkable that she was handling the workload typically requiring 3 tutors. Miss Terry mentioned that tutoring Astrid alone was already quite demanding, and she couldn't fathom taking on 2 more children. Roland and Melisa, however, looked utterly bewildered, unable to grasp the complexities Miss Terry described, as it was beyond their comprehension. Glancing at Roland and Melisa, Miss Terry expressed her apprehension about teaching such young children. She noted that preparing lessons for them would consume additional time, potentially impacting Lady Astrid's lessons negatively if she had to manage more students. Claude understood her position and acknowledged they couldn't let this affect Astrid's education, so he permitted Miss Terry to leave. He apologized for the situation and promised to find another teacher soon. Karina reassured him there was no rush, and the children nodded in agreement. She remarked that Lady Astrid must be a truly exceptional student. To this, Claude affirmed, adding that Astrid was not only a good student, but also a good sister. Karina felt a pang of nervousness, wondering about the meaning behind the expression on Claude's face. Claude explained that since she had arrived in haste, many things were unprepared, and thus invited her to join him for dinner in the main building. He assured her there was no issue with dining together, as she was a guest in his mansion, not an employee. Karina hesitated, but eventually agreed. Claude added that she shouldn't feel pressured, as it was just a simple meal, not a formal banquet. During dinner, Claude mentioned it had been a long time since he had dined with others. Karina then inquired about Lady Astrid, to which Claude replied that Astrid disliked him. This made Karina wonder if there was some tension between them. Meanwhile, Melisa and Roland were eating heartily, and seeing their enjoyment brought Karina a sense of contentment, thinking they must truly love the food here. Claude noted the children's good table manners, commenting that Karina had raised them well. Karina hesitated, slightly recoiling from the compliment. Recalling that she had previously mentioned they were the children of her late husband and his former wife, she quickly explained that it was their father who had raised them so well. When Claude inquired if their father had been a nobleman, Karina shook her head, denying it. She clarified nervously that her late husband had been a merchant. Claude seemed intrigued, remarking that with such a background, her late husband must have left behind a considerable fortune. He then questioned why Karina was struggling in another city like this one. As Claude pressed her about her struggles, Karina grew anxious and flustered. But before she could explain, Melisa cried out that their uncle was a bad man. Roland chimed in, adding that their uncle hit them and took all their money. Karina quickly hushed them, but Claude, curious about the children's uncle, asked if he was the problem. Karina then spun a tale, claiming her husband's elder brother had seized all the remaining assets and had even attempted to sell the children. She explained that this was why they had fled to Torres instead of Edmore. Claude asked if they still intended to go to the capital afterward. Karina confirmed that they did. Claude replied that he had simply assumed they would head to the capital later. He then asked Karina why she hadn't inquired about how to remove the mark. Karina thought to herself that the children shouldn't know about her mark. Melisa and Roland quickly changed the subject then, with Melisa praising the delicious food and Roland encouraging her to eat more. Claude conceded that perhaps he had been too hasty in his assumptions earlier. Karina brushed it off, stating she wasn't particularly curious about the mark anyway. Claude pointed out that she used to want to know everything, but she countered that she trusted him to handle it, just as he had promised. She added that she wanted to do her best for her children. Claude, slightly flustered by her response, suggested she get up, mentioning he would call the chef over. Surprised, Karina asked if he was truly assigning the chef to them. Claude confirmed it, stating the chef would also serve as their guard and look after the children. Karina mused that a duke's chef must be extraordinary, just as she saw a tall, powerfully built man approaching. Claude introduced him as Edward Harris, who would be responsible for their protection from now on. He then introduced Karina and the children, referring to them as Mrs. Bleuet and her children, Roland and Melisa Bleuet. The children were startled by Edward's size. Melisa commented on how huge he was, while Roland found him intimidating. Edward smiled gently, introduced himself, and extended a hand to Karina. He told her to feel free to call him Edward, and reassured her that she had nothing to worry about. He emphasized that as guests of the Duke's household, she could relax as if she were in her own home. Karina silently noted that Edward spoke as if he were the master of the ducal house, wondering if the Duke, the actual master, might be offended by his words. She glanced at Claude, questioning if he minded. Claude instructed Karina to take the children back to their room to rest, as he needed to leave. Edward then mentioned that Sir Chichester seemed to have done something wrong, though Claude hadn't been directly informed. Edward assured Claude he would understand immediately upon seeing it, given their long acquaintance. Claude agreed to see Chichester before departing. Karina thought the atmosphere between Edward and Claude felt more like that between peers rather than a typical superior-subordinate relationship. Edward knelt down to face Roland and Melisa, introducing himself as Uncle Edward. The children were thrilled, responding enthusiastically and expressing their hope to get along well with him. Karina observed that the children seemed quite taken with Mr. Edward. As they walked down the corridor, Roland noticed a sculpture of a demon and asked Edward about it. Edward explained it was a gargoyle, a type of malevolent creature that once preyed on humans. Over time, humans grew stronger and fought back against the gargoyles. Ultimately, humanity prevailed against them, and this stone statue remained, standing as a testament to the long suffering and profound sacrifice endured throughout that battle.